Good morning, and welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update here on First Amendment Radio. I'm your host, Tom Fress, and we'll continue our reading and discussion of the book, The Global Vatican by Ambassador Francis Rooney, the revealing book showing the Vatican's manipulation of world politics, of the fomenting of world wars to achieve her diabolical agenda to advance the papacy to global supremacy in a one-world government, a one-world religion, a one-world economic, and a one-world social system. The New World Order. It's simply the restoration of the old world order on a global scale. Yesterday we concluded by in the middle of a discussion about the second half of the Crusades of the 20th century, that being the First World War and the Second World War. We're focusing on the Second World War and the role the Vatican played in Nazi fascism in Germany and also communism in Russia. And before I even continue, we need everyone to realize that Lenin, Stalin, and the leaders of Russia post-Bolshevik Revolution were Jesuits. That's right, Jesuit-educated. Stalin was a Jesuit priest, graduated from Tiflis, Jesuit University in Tiflis. It's the papacy and the Jesuits who are behind communism. Communism being a form of government created in the Paraguayan reductions and then transmuted into a supposedly atheist belief system and then transported into Russia. Remember, when people ask me to describe the reasons why the Jesuits or why the Roman Catholic Church would do this, I often have to remind the listeners that the philosophy of the papacy, the philosophy of the Roman Catholic Church has always been the church is more dynamic. In other words, advances her agenda more readily when the world is at war or when there's conflict in the world. When there's general peace and a satisfaction with the status quo, there's no energy or justification for change. There's no justification for the advancement of the papal agenda. So these various forms of government are literally antagonistic systems that form the energy or the fuel for conflict, for war. And it is under the cover of conflict and war that the papacy stands aloof and appears to all the world to be the peacemaker, when in fact it is his Jesuits who foment these wars to advance this global agenda. That's the way we should view the First and the Second World War. Now we'll continue where we left off yesterday in our discussion about fascism and about communism and about the papacy, the Antichrist of the Bible, his role in this conflict. The author says the best way to understand the response of the church to fascism in the 1930s is to appreciate its concerns about the rise of communism in Russia and elsewhere. Okay? Now, the papacy has pitted two forms of government, two ideologies at loggerheads, fascism and communism. And through this conflict, while standing aloof and pretending to be the peacemaker, is actually gaining power and influence and control. This conflict results in the call for a global government. That's right up the Pope's alley. That one who calls himself the vicar of Christ on earth, and that when he speaks, it is Christ who speaks. It is the Bible that gives Christ King of Kings and Lord of Lords status, and the Pope believes that status belongs to him. And in order to fulfill that status, there must be conflict And the result of the conflict is control, advancing the Jesuit and the Vatican agenda. Now, we have fascism on one side, communism on the other. So we have the fuel for conflict. Now it says communism was explicitly atheistic. All right, I'll just stop with that portion of the sentence. Communism was explicitly atheistic. No, it was Roman Catholic. It was led by Jesuits. Lenin, Stalin were Jesuit trained. They were simply going to use Russia to appear to be atheistic and to be a threat to the Christian West. More energy for this conflict. You see, naturally, common sense dictates that if Russia is atheistic and if it ever gains power, it's going to be a threat to Christianity. Or Roman Catholicism, rather. And so this has very much excited all of Europe and even the United States of America, a so-called Christian nation. And all through all of this, through the cover of war, through the cover of conflict, every battle is fought to advance the papal agenda. Communism was explicitly atheistic and therefore viewed as an immediate existential threat to the Catholic Church and to religion in general. He says, while the fascists may have manipulated the Roman Catholic Church, they at least paid lip service to the idea that it had a right to exist. Remember, Adolf Hitler's Roman Catholic, a devout son of the Roman Catholic Church. His God dwells in Rome on a great white throne. And he's serving the papacy just like Stalin and Lenin did. Now he says the communists did not, according to this author. Now, so you see the conflict. Christian Europe, atheistic communism in Russia. As Lenin, a graduate of Jesuit University, as Lenin so famously phrased the communist position, quote, religion is the opium of the people in which the slaves of capital drown their human image, unquote. So he appears to be atheistic, doesn't he? Well, he has to appear to be atheistic in order to pose a real threat, an existential threat to quote-unquote Christianity in Europe. Now Lenin, remember again, Jesuit trained, Lenin later exhorted the, quote, proletariat of today, unquote, to take, quote, the side of socialism, unquote, and enlist, quote, science in the battle against the fog of religion, unquote. So it appears to be just exactly what the Vatican intends for Russia to appear, to be a nation pitted on the side of atheism, an existential and critical threat to Christianity and all religions, not just Christianity. Remember, the Pope claims himself to be the vicar of all religions. All right. Now, in Russia, by one Vatican official's calculation, 50% of Catholic clergy had vanished in the 5 years following the revolution. Okay, I won't question that number, but listen, there was a blood purge. Rome killed many of her own priests in preparation for this war. They didn't need Roman Catholic priests and bishops siding with the enemy. When Rome's going to go on a crusade, she first cleans up her own house before she goes to war. Now it says the church was later criticized for underestimating the threat of fascism, but it also should be credited for perceiving earlier than anyone the pernicious alternative that communism presented. Okay? It's okay if you want to criticize the Pope for not recognizing the threat of Hitler soon enough. But you at least have to give the Roman Catholic Church credit for understanding the pernicious alternative. Communism, godless communism. Both sides were operated by the Jesuits. It's all, look, have you ever heard the phrase, all the world is a stage? It is literally true. All the world is a stage. It's great entertainment, but the cost of that entertainment is incalculable. You know, many military people like to boast about their military service. I wonder what military people would think if they finally grasped the idea that every human being within the crosshairs of their weapons during war was just another dupe like himself, fighting and dying, not for the benefit of liberty, not for the benefit of freedom, not for the benefit of independence, not for the benefit of justice, not for the benefit of peace, but for the benefit of the Antichrist of the Bible. And I'm not going to just pick on military people who are proud of their military service and love to remain ignorant about the real purposes of war, but how about the common taxpayer who doesn't serve in the military, but who works his life away to pay taxes to finance these diabolical wars, not for peace, not for liberty, not for security, not for freedom, not for any good thing, but to advance a global agenda for the papacy. We all stand condemned as deceived beyond comprehension, and we've all been made slaves by the papacy. We're either working our fingers to the bone to pay taxes to support these papal proxy wars, or we're literally entering into militaries to be so dehumanized that we do not value the life of other people in other nations, and gladly proudly go about championing the cause of something we know nothing about and killing other human beings. All for the benefit of the Antichrist of the Bible. We all stand condemned. We all stand guilty. Every single one of us. Isn't it time the world wake up? All the world's a stage. And we're all so preoccupied with the goings-on on that stage that we never stop to realize. The Bible predicts all of this. None of us should be surprised about what happens. And we should all be in protest against it. We should reject the deception that is presented to us on a global scale, on this global stage. And finally, some biblical sanity come to humanity. And put down this man of sin and his Jesuit manipulators, his Jesuit fomenters of war and conflict, so that a mere sinful man, might rule over us all. Would it be so difficult? Satan deceived Adam. Should we continue to stand in condemnation of Adam for being deceived by the serpent? Or should we acknowledge our error, get on our knees in repentance, and ask God to fight for us? That's what Daniel did. He says, none of this suggests that the Reich Concordat was anything but a mistake. Okay? He's throwing you a bone here. The Reich Concordat, the Concordat between Hitler's Germany and the Roman Catholic Church, was in hindsight a mistake. Okay? He says in hindsight, whether the church gave up too much or not, Hitler never seriously intended to honor the agreement. Remember, all the world's a stage. the Vatican, Hitler, Stalin, Roosevelt, they all knew what was going on. They all knew what the agenda was. He says the Nazis interfered in ecclesiastical matters from the beginning. Okay, that was a violation of the Concordat. Nazis were supposed to leave the church alone, and the church was supposed to stay out of German politics. And turn right around, and von Papen and others within Germany canceled the Center Party, just eliminated the Centrum Party, the Roman Catholic Party, and that forced all Roman Catholics to support the Jesuit Prince Adolf Hitler. Of course the Germans were used in politics. The German Catholics were used in politics. And of course Hitler helped to purge the Roman Catholic Church. There was a crusade to fight. The Vatican and Hitler were in bed together. They were working together. He says the Nazis interfered in ecclesiastical matters from the beginning. There's your blood purge. Meanwhile, they pursued increasingly hostile social policies. More discipline. Social policies. Social policies are used to manipulate the people. Okay? Social policies help to brainwash the people. Now he says 5 days after signing the Concordat, the Nazis began enforcing sterilization of the mentally ill, the physically deformed, and all other Germans deemed unfit by the Nazis to pass on their genes. Hitler then turned on the Jews. Okay, this is one of the primary objectives of the Second World War, to silence the vast percentage of European Jews who would not go back to Israel unless God himself led them, just as he did out of slavery in Egypt. There was a move to alleviate the persecution and suffering of the Jews in Europe. The suggestion was widely made among a certain sect of Jewishness, of Jewry, that we need to go back to our homeland. We need to have our own nation so we can defend ourselves. We need to be separate from the world. And that was immediately answered by a vast percentage of Jewry. We're not going back unless God leads us with a mighty right hand. But that didn't fit the papal agenda. The papacy, in order to foment its phony futurist interpretation of Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, absolutely demanded that there be a nation state of Israel with Jews living in the land, a temple to be built, and animal sacrifices to be resumed. And then after 3.5 years of animal sacrifices, the Antichrist causes those sacrifices and oblations to cease. Never mind that Jesus fulfilled that prophecy exactly and perfectly and completely 2,000 years ago. No, in the Roman Catholic Church, Jesus is not the Messiah. And as a matter of fact, Pope John Paul II said so verbatim. He said, Jesus did not come to this world to be the Messiah, to be the Christ. Jesus came to this world to show the Christ in every man. Every man. And the focus of that Christ is going to be the Vicar of Christ, the Pope of Rome. So in the fulfillment of this phony futurist interpretation of Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, which virtually the entire Christian world believes in, the papacy can put forward this Antichrist figure who will sign a peace treaty with the Jews for 7 years, allowing them to build a temple and begin animal sacrifices again, and then after 3.5 years cause the sacrifices and oblations to cease. The entire Christian world is prepared to believe that man is the Antichrist, leaving the world stage wide open for the entry of the Pope to rule the world. It is absolutely essential for the Nazis, for a Jesuit-controlled Adolf Hitler to persecute the Jews and to silence that sect of Jewry that absolutely would not go. And as a matter of fact, they wanted to assimilate into European society and lose their Jewishness rather than go back to Israel without God's help, knowing that it would be nothing but a ghetto for the world's Jews, for their ultimate annihilation and destruction. Their voices had to be silenced. Enter Adolf Hitler. Okay? There's a lot of people around the world who I classify as Holocaust deniers. But the world knows that there was a vast percentage of Jews that did not want their own homeland. They knew and accepted that God had exiled them from the land, and only God could bring them back. And it would be in like fashion as he did when he brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. They were not deceived. They were not utopians. They knew that they had to accept their lot. But the Vatican needs Jerusalem. The Vatican needs Israel. The Vatican needs Jews living in the land. The Vatican needs an Antichrist figure to sign a 7-year peace treaty and then break it after 3.5 years and then be ultimately destroyed. And then the Pope is free to rule. That's where all this is headed. That's the purpose of the Second World War. One of the major purposes of the Second World War. Remember that futurism, which gained its popularity in the United States in the 1800s, there'd been over 150 years of futurism being preached and infiltrating all the Protestant churches. So it's the Protestants as much as anything else that want to fight these wars, thinking they're doing God's service. And if it benefits the Pope, all the better. Isn't he the leader of the Christian world? You see what futurism does? It completely exonerates the papacy of its diabolical and prophetic role and makes him not the Antichrist, but the vicar of Christ. Christianity personified in the Pope, see? And so they think nothing of going off to war, never suspecting that the Antichrist might be leading them to war to kill other human beings who are just as equally deceived as they are, making them pay with their treasure, with their gold, and with their blood and their guts and their taxes, completely enslaved, completely mind-controlled, completely duped. And that's what we have. That's facts on the ground. Observable facts on the ground. Widespread deception from left to right, from horizon to horizon, from coast to coast. And God help the man of God that tries to stand up and wake up. The dupes. But before anybody gets to thinking I'm putting myself on a platform, I've got a confession to make. I was just as duped as you for 50 years of my life. God granted me repentance. He can grant it to you too. God hasten the day. Let us expose this Antichrist counterfeit of Jesus. Let us end his wars. Let us call for peace in the name of the Prince of Peace. Stop fighting and dying and paying for papal proxy wars to make us all slaves. We'll be back from the break. You're listening to Inquisition Update. Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
years ahead of the dominant media. FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net. The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the left behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to hear Inquisition Update continue on this network, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And if you wish to comment, you may contact me directly by email, tom@seawaves.us, tom@seawaves.us. Now, the author continues. He says, 5 days after signing the Reich Concordat in 1933, Eugenio Pacelli, the hierarchs of the Roman Catholic Church, together with Nazis, German, papist Adolf Hitler, began enforcing sterilization of the mentally ill and physically deformed and all other Germans deemed unfit by the Nazis to pass on their genes. Racial purity. That's what they want. I mean, after all, you can't be a good Roman Catholic if you're physically deformed or if you're mentally ill or if you're deemed unfit by the Jesuits to pass on your genes. A super race. That's what they want. A super race of Roman Catholics. And they're going to extirpate and annihilate the heretics out of the realms. And that includes those who are physically deformed, mentally ill, and unfit, according to Jesuits' determination. You know, the Vatican has this tremendous public image of being the great defender of the unborn. They lead the pack when it comes to trying to defeat abortion in this country. But look what the Germans are doing here. Look what the Roman Catholics are doing here. Mentally ill, physically deformed. Those deemed unfit by the Nazis, which means Jesuits, unfit to pass on their genes. Now they have the capability of destroying those people in the womb. They don't even need to wait for them to be born to demonstrate their physical deformities or their mental incapacities or their unfitness for passing on their genes. They just kill them right in the womb. And the whole world believes the Roman Catholic Church is the great stand against abortion. The whole world buys it. But here are the Catholics in action. Adolf Hitler, Goering, Himmler, Joseph Mengele, destroying anybody that's unfit to pass on their genes. Next time you see a Roman Catholic protest in front of an abortion clinic, just nod and say, thanks for the show. I don't buy it. Now you know the truth of history. The ultimate responsibility for all those who died in Europe is the papacy, both the living and the unborn. The man of sin, the son of perdition, the destroyer, who the whole world believes is a representative of Christ on the earth. He says Hitler then turned on the Jews. You know why they turn on the Jews? Not because the Jews killed Christ, but because God chose the Jews to bring the oracles of God to humanity. Chose to reveal the Messiah to humanity. That distinction Satan wants. And then to pervert Christ into something that the world would revile. No one has done more damage to Christianity than the mother of all the churches, the Roman Catholic Church. For Satan, it's a dream come true. He turned on the Jews. As bad as Pope Pius XI and Cardinal Pacelli, that is the future Pope Pius XII, knew Hitler to be, they would have been stunned by the brazen comment he made shortly after the Concordat was signed. The Reich Concordat, said Hitler, would be, quote, especially significant in the urgent struggle against international Jewry, unquote. There's another quote that has been omitted by this author. Hitler famously said, I'm only doing to the Jews what the Roman Catholic Church has done for over 1,500 years. He was a crusader, a Roman Catholic crusader par excellence. And it's really only the horror of Adolf Hitler that keeps the Roman Catholic Church from canonizing him a saint. He says that it took time for the church to grasp the evil of Hitler, owes to the fact that there had never been anyone like Adolf Hitler. It took time for the entire world to recognize the extent of his evil. As E.E.Y. Hale states, quote, "Nobody quite believed that any government once in power could really attempt to carry out the program of Mein Kampf," unquote. It's just too horrible to believe that anybody, any government, any power on earth could really carry out the program of Mein Kampf. Did you know Mein Kampf was written by a Jesuit priest by the name of Stempel, and was written for Adolf Hitler, and Hitler just was given out to be the author? It was a Jesuit priest. Stempel was his name. All the world's a stage. Pius XI gradually awakened to the full horror of the man. In 1937, he angrily addressed the Nazi regime in an encyclical. Here's some more great papal thunder. An encyclical entitled Mit brennender Sorge, which means with burning anxiety. This Pope is just racked with anxiety. His crusade is going too marvelously well, and he has to distance himself by chiding the Nazi regime. It was smuggled into Germany to be read by Roman Catholic bishop, read from Roman Catholic bishops' pulpits on Palm Sunday. The encyclical excoriated the Germans for failing to live up to their end of the Concordat. Its real focus was the graver crime of turning Nazism into a pagan religion which, quote, certain leaders pretend to draw from the so-called myth of race and blood, unquote. Kind of had to tone that down a little bit, didn't he? I mean, after all, he was talking about his man in Germany. Regarding Jewish persecution by the Nazis, Pius declared the sacredness of the Old Testament. Remember, if you reverence the Old Testament, you're paying respect to the Jews because they don't accept the New Testament. Regarding Jewish persecution by the Nazis, Pius declared the sacredness of the Old Testament and, by implication, the Jewish faith. You see, you have to pretend to be a lover of the Jews when it is your business to exterminate and to annihilate the Jews. Because you wouldn't want the world to wake up to the fact. Now, in January of 1939, the National Jewish Monthly commented that, quote, the only bright spot in Italy has been the Vatican, where fine humanitarian statements by the Pope, that is Pope Pius XI, have been issuing regularly, unquote. Great humanitarian, this Pope. And this was published in a Jewish periodical. This was telling the Jewish world that the Pope was their friend while they were dying in the gas chambers by Jesuit-led Adolf Hitler, and worked to death, and starved to death, and carved up like cattle, right along with Protestants and Orthodox. It's a global crusade, remember? He said, Mit brennender Sorge was a sequel to a similar denunciation by Pope Pius XI of Mussolini's own brand of fascism and his suppression of Catholic youth and civic groups, including Catholic Action. That is, it was called the Ustashi in the former Yugoslavia. Catholic Action. You see, Rome is, well, carefully organized. Even the youth defend the Roman Catholic Church. They're used as couriers. They're used as warriors. They're used to butcher the heretics. Hitler, or rather Mussolini, seemed to put these organizations down. And it says in the 1931 encyclical Non Embriamo Bisogno, it says this is where the suppression of the Catholic youth was. And it says, interestingly, since Mussolini had eliminated freedom of the press in Italy, The work was smuggled out of Italy to France by the American Monsignor and future Cardinal Francis Spellman, so that it could be printed in Paris. Francis Spellman smuggled it out of Italy and into France. Well, wasn't Spellman the top dog in America during the Kennedy administration? Wasn't it Cardinal Spellman that was really running the Vietnam War? Remember the book, The Vatican, Why Did We Go, by Avro Manhattan? We read it right here on Inquisition Update and commented about it. They call it Spelly's War. Spellman's War. The Vietnam War was Cardinal Spellman's war. Cardinal Spellman and the Roman Catholic hierarchy in America and around the world were supporting this war against the Buddhists. It was another Roman Catholic crusade, and Kennedy, being pressured by the Protestants of this country, attempted to bring the war to a halt, to stop the crusade, to stop the American Protestants from bleeding and dying and becoming incalculably indebted to a war that was to benefit the Pope and only the Pope. That's why they killed him. Cardinal Spellman is a warrior, as are all cardinals of the Roman Catholic Church. That's why they wear red, the color of scarlet, the color of blood. Remember that scarlet-colored cord that binds the two keys on the papal flag, the gold key and the silver key? That's the blood that binds those two keys together. You cannot separate the Pope's temporal power, his kingly power, which is represented by the silver key, from the golden power, his spiritual power, without the shedding of blood. And Vietnam wouldn't accept the Pope's authority, nor would it accept Roman Catholicism. So the Buddhists had to go. Just another papal crusade, just like World War I and World War II. Cardinal Spellman, American Cardinal Spellman, hustled that encyclical out of Italy and into France so that it could be published. He says the Pope may have been oblique in mit brennender sword, but his meaning was clear. For one thing, the encyclical was written in German rather than the usual Latin, a good clue as to the intended audience. And the fact that the Nazi troops confiscated the encyclical and quickly as it appeared suggests the message was heard loud and clear. All the world's a stage. The Pope's pretending to be a peacemaker, pretending to criticize the Nazi regime, writing encyclicals in German so the German people can read it, and the Nazis gathering it all up and burning it so nobody can read it. It's all a stage. It's all an act. The crusade goes on. Hitler and the papacy are on the same page. They're just putting on a public performance to deceive the whole world. He says, but that was part of the problem. The Pope's encyclical put Hitler in a fury. That's right, you need to infuriate Adolf Hitler, so he'll go on a more and more and more bloody crusade. He threatened to push them back, them being the Roman Catholic Church. See, they've successfully made it as though Hitler and the Roman Catholic Church were at odds. All the world's a stage. He says rather than mend his ways, he became more antagonistic. The crusade goes on, see? Speaking out against Hitler seemed to make matters worse. Of course, worse meaning better. They've inflamed the crusader. More fire, more fuel to the crusade, more fuel to the fire. Worse was to come in any case, says the author. How much worse became clear only after Pope Pius XI passed away in 1939. The man who succeeded him, Eugenio Pacelli, the one who signed the Concordat with Hitler, Pope Pius XII, would learn, along with the rest of the world, that Adolf Hitler meant every word of Mein Kampf. More public consumption. They know the Jesuits wrote Mein Kampf. They know Hitler's going to go on a crusade, killing the heretics, and they're going to stand back and be aloof and peacemakers and condemn Adolf Hitler, and the whole world's going to buy it. See how easy it is to deceive a whole world full of people? The Bible even tells us he will deceive the whole world, even the very elect, if it were possible. You've got to admit, when it comes to deception, there is no one more proficient than the Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuits. Their only match is the son of perdition, Satan himself. Imagine all the killing that took place in the Second World War. None of it would have been necessary if the truth were known. The whole world was deceived, and it still is. Part 2 of this chapter, The World at War, goes like this. Never was a man better prepared for the papacy than Eugenio Pacelli. Born into Rome's black nobility, those are the author's words, born into Rome's black nobility, one of the city's aristocratic families that had served the Vatican for generations. There's the definition for what you hear all the time, people talking about the black nobility. They don't have a clue who they're talking about, but they seem authoritative when they talk about the black nobility. Here's the definition of the black nobility. Aristocratic families that have served the Vatican for generations. That's who the black nobility is. Rome's black nobility, one of the city's aristocratic families that had served the Vatican for generations, Pacelli had been groomed in various roles over the previous 4 decades as a nuncio, an undersecretary of state, and finally as Cardinal Secretary of State under Pope Pius XI. Eugenio Pacelli, he's part of the black nobility, no doubt Jesuit trained, got the best education. The black nobility always gets the black education, don't you know? He's on board with this crusade. He helped foment it under Pope Pius XI. He helped sign the Concordat, or rather officiated over the signing of the Concordat with Hitler. And now he's going to lead his part of the crusade. Pope Pius XII. Antichrist, Pope Pius XII. He possessed the gifts of a great pope, a brilliant mind, a long resume of diplomatic experience, fluent in 6 languages, while also emanating an aura of holiness and moral rectitude. The man of sin, the son of perdition, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist of the Bible, emanated an aura of holiness and moral rectitude. And the whole world bought it. He seamlessly combined the worldliness of a seasoned diplomat with the otherworldliness of a mystic. He was, in short, a man born to be Pope. He certainly was. As it turned out, Pope Pius XII, installed on March 12, 1939, served through one of the most difficult papacies in church history and emerged as one of Catholicism's most controversial figures. He was and still is held in much esteem as to be declared venerable in 2009. To be declared venerable, it puts you well on down the road to becoming canonized. Saint Pope Pius XII. All right? He says it's a big first step on the road to canonization. Numerous biographies of Pius, that is Pius XII, affirm his life as extraordinary and heroic. Yet at the same time, with his supposed failure to speak out forcibly against the Holocaust, yuck, yuck, he has been reviled by critics as an appeaser of Adolf Hitler. Yeah, bedfellow with Adolf Hitler. The titles of a few books about Pope Pius XII that have hit the shelves over the past decade, for instance, The Devil's Pope, Hitler's Pope, The Silence of Pius XII, give a good indication of what Pius's critics think of him. Given that our interest here is to analyze and chronicle Pope Pius's role in the context of the Church as a diplomatic power during the war, particularly vis-a-vis the United States, there's no need to belabor the pros and cons of this debate here, but we cannot ignore them either. So now we're going to get the watered down version. Listen, I highly recommend these other books that he's mentioned of Pope Pius XII's critics, The Devil's Pope, Hitler's Pope, and The Silence of Pope Pius XII. You come a lot closer to the truth in those books than you ever will this one. While I don't believe this author is telling us wall-to-wall lies, he's certainly covering for the papacy. He's certainly a devout Roman Catholic, and he's certainly behind the Pope's New World Order, secretly, and much, much better off reading the other books to at least understand the deception behind this one, whether it's willful deception, knowing deception, or whether it's just plain ignorance and loyalty to his church. He continues, sometimes lost in the controversy surrounding Pope Pius XII and the Holocaust, we'll get to that in a moment, he says, is the fact that the war years marked an important turning point in relations between the Holy See and the United States. Okay? Another advantage of this crusade was to chummy up the relationship between the first beast and the second beast of Revelation chapter 13. He says, over the course of his papacy, Pope Pius XII developed closer ties to America than any previous pope. Indeed, these ties were well established before he became pope. Probably well established when Hitler was signing the Reichskonkordat with Pope Pius XII. In the fall of 1936, when Cardinal Secretary of State Pacelli had become the highest-ranking Vatican official to visit the United States, all right, 1936, a year to be remembered in American annals, right? 1936, the future Pope Pius XII made a visit to the United States. Pacelli's lengthy journey was covered with great fanfare in the American press, his every move detailed and dissected. Of course, that's what you do when you have a representative of God Almighty on your turf. You want to examine every blink of his eye, every twitch of his nose, and every subtle gesture, because in every one are meanings to be derived and calculated. Okay? Our press worshipped Eugenio Pacelli because he was a representative of God. Who controls the press? It certainly isn't Protestant control. That we are assured. Pacelli's lengthy journey was covered with great fanfare in the American press, his every move detailed and dissected. He traveled 8,000 miles during his month-long stay, including a 5-day, 7-city, coast-to-coast airplane excursion. The highlight of the trip was a meeting with Franklin Roosevelt at the president's family estate in Hyde Park, New York, on November 5th, 2 days after Roosevelt was elected to his second term. Another American president bowing to the beast. The first beast meets the president of the second beast. You got to know more about this, and we'll cover it tomorrow on Inquisition Update. Thanks for listening.